Hey everyone, welcome back to the Alberta Roundup. I'm your host, Rachel Emmanuel. We are doing something a little bit different today. We are looking into a situation over in Chestermere, where the city mayor, along with 3 city councillors and 3 administrative officers, were dismissed by the provincial government. They were dismissed by Municipal Affairs Minister Rick McIver. Today, I am joined by the former mayor Jeff Colvin, as well as one of the city councillors, Stephen Hanley. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel.
So, Jeff, we spoke on the phone a little bit earlier and I asked you what's going on in Chestermere. A lot of my members of my audience have reached out to me and they've asked me to look into this story. They said something strange is going on in Chestermere. When I started looking into it, I was a bit confused as well, I have to admit. I've never heard of a mayor and city councillors being dismissed by the government before. I know it has happened, but it's used in very rare circumstances. You said that the municipal government began looking into your council just about 2 months after you were elected, and after you and your fellow councillors spent some time digging into the finances and finding things that didn't add up. Can you share a little bit about what happened when you were elected and how quickly the municipal government began investigating you?
Sure. Thank you very much, Rachel. What happened is that basically there was a group of us that were interested in running for council. We had all had various timeframes of living in Chestermere. Myself, I had lived in Chestermere for about 25 years. And I decided that there were some things that I could help the city with. There's a lot of growth here, and my background is in development of subdivisions and water and sewer and pipelines and sidewalks, et cetera. And so it had appeared on the outside that the city was getting taken advantage of. Their contracts were seeming to be very one-sided to the developer or slash to the construction company. And I thought that I could come in and help with how to make sure that didn't happen anymore. There was some questionable tactics that we saw from the outside, the way that the council was being treated by the CAO at the time before we got into office. And so I didn't feel comfortable with the way that they were being talked down to and the way that they were being controlled. And it felt like, from what my experience was, they weren't getting the whole story. And the way that councillors are brought in, they're often brought in on not just their resume, but they're brought in on because their desire to contribute to the community. So it doesn't mean that they're experts in these fields. And so they're relying entirely on that CAO giving them enough information to make somewhat of an informed decision. So when we got into office, we were successful. I was successful in winning my position, which was the mayor of Chestermere. We noticed it to be very confrontational with the existing senior staff, as well as the existing CAO, which I mentioned before had some issues. A lot of the things that we identified, I knew very well what they were talking about because it was infrastructure based and development, construction, et cetera. And he didn't like the fact that I knew what I was talking about, or at least I knew what they were talking about. And very quickly, we had looked into how do we get more transparency with our city so that our councillors can get access to more information, and ultimately so our constituents or our public can get access to more information so that they can know what's going on. And so we started looking at a model called a tri-CAO model, which was basically bringing in 3 CAOs instead of 1. And what we found very quickly when we did that is it massively increased the transparency factor. We brought in private sector skilled people in their areas. So one of our areas, for example, was corporate services, which is more like your internal operations. So your accounting, your marketing, your communications. And then your other department was your community operations, which is more of your roads and fleet. So more of a blue collar type work. And then you're looking at your engineering and development, which is more of a professional and engineer, for example. So we hired those people with those specific skills. And so that actually reduced what you pay these CAOs, because these CAOs, I just don't believe that they know everything. I don't follow that idea that, the city is a big company. It operates a lot of different things compared to a normal company, which operates, 3 or 4 main product lines and is very laser focused. And a city is just not that. But it doesn't mean you don't want high levels of expertise. And so that's one of the things that we brought in. And in that situation of bringing these experts to the table, it not only provided massive transparency to council, it also allowed those people to have a direct connection to council and a direct connection all the way through their staff, rather than having a CAO where people come to him and he determines what's important to bring to council. And so when I first got into my office, the first day, which was unfortunately about 8 days after the election, because they were kind of playing games with us on getting our orientation done. Usually it's done the next day. Ours wasn't done till the 26th of October 2021. And when I came into my office was completely clean. So what I mean by that is not a piece of paper, not a pen, not a paper clip, not a notepad, not some files in the drawers that what was the past projects the mayor was working on. There was nothing, not a thing. I looked in the computer, not an electronic file, not an email. Everything had been deleted. Everything had been erased. So that kind of gets your spidey senses a little bit going as to, what's going on. Where's the continuity of service? Our city is obviously older than a day old. So there needs to be stuff that we were working on. And so what we soon found out is they had deleted all of the emails of the CAO and of the past mayor off the server, off their laptops, off everything. We then further found out that, we were in office about less than a month, and the CAO, the interim CAO that we hired to replace the CAO that we had let go, before we were bringing in our tri-CAO model, came to the three of us, being two councillors and myself, and asked me if I was willing to provide a mea culpa. And I said, what's a mea culpa? And I was like, is that where you want me to forgive some kind of crime? And he said, yes. If staff come forward, are you willing to forgive their crime if they come forward? And I said, I'm a mayor. I'm not a judge. I don't have that authority. I don't have that. I mean, we could bring in the RCMP, and I'm sure if these people come forward with something, I'm sure they'd get a lesser sentence or something. But they should definitely come forward. And he wasn't too impressed with that, but without skipping a beat, he then asked, is it okay if I I plan to pay out some hush money? And I kind of chuckled. I said, what do you mean by hush money? I said, I think I know what you mean by hush money. You want to pay somebody out so that they don't tell something that's not been done properly, and you're trying to get rid of them or something. And he had indicated that was the case. And I said, no. I said, we ran on, the three of us at the table ran on transparency and cleaning up corruption. The last thing we want to do is sweep it under the carpet. And so we wanted to make sure that if there's something to talk about, we want that information coming out to the public. Never mind, of course, coming out to council. And so he was quite visibly upset that we weren't prepared to agree to something so simple. And we just thought that was just terrible. Now, maybe he was trying to make us complicit with something, so they had something on us. I don't know, but Stephen Hanley was in the meeting as well with me, and it was just shocking. Like, Steve, what was your recollection of the event?
Yeah, no, I think you described it perfectly. I was just as shocked as anyone else. We had found a lot of things in that very short period. Issues with the utility company, with confidentiality agreements, the land sales around the lake. Every time we turned around and we had a question, it usually led to something very nasty. And then to just be asked, for mea culpa, and, if they come forward, will they be forgiven? And I remember my first thoughts was, if people were just if it's staff and they're just doing what they were told to do, they have no culpability, right? It's whoever instructed them. But that should go off to the appropriate authorities. It's not our place. We don't have all of the detail. And then the other thought occurred to me about the destruction of all of the information by the city, right? Could you even get to that level of detail? And then
we had council had passed a motion to have a forensic audit done, and we said that nothing needs to be thrown out, no shredding, nothing. And I came to work early one morning, and I show this on some of the slides that we show at our presentations. I came to work early one morning, and there was a shredding truck sitting there in the morning before anybody had got there. And I took pictures of it, and I took pictures of the work order and this. And then I said, you can't shred anything in this building. I said, this has been frozen. There's nothing allowed to be shredded. And funny enough, this had been ordered by an ex-employee that was the returning officer who had been promised a job during our election as the EA to the CAO that was let go. And you're like, that sounds like a conflict of interest if there ever was one. And so, we just found that what Stephen was mentioning about, we had a company, our utility company was called CUI, and which stood for Chestermere Utilities Incorporated. That corporation was a wholly owned company of the city of Chestermere. And so it had its own board, though. It's a separate company, so it's a real entity. And the city would not share the financial data of that company. And you're like, well, what do you mean? It's owned by the city? No, it's a private entity. We don't have to share it. What? So we were upset with that perspective when we were running for office. We wanted information on the utility because there was a lot of issues that had happened with the utility in the past. And we had actually had 5,500 residents over the age of 18 sign a petition to have the utility investigated and the council investigated in 2016 for corruption and sent to Municipal Affairs, and Municipal Affairs did nothing.
So just taking a look at some of your, earlier claims with this meeting that you had with the former CAO when he came and asked about the hush money, you two were both in that meeting. Was there anyone else present in that meeting?
Councillor Mel Fulton, he was the deputy mayor at the time. And unfortunately, Mel has some technical difficulties today and he can't get on. But yeah, no, he was there at the time. And we're actually in the process of signing an affidavit to that effect of this information that we had all witnessed from this interim CAO and the kind of stuff that was going on in there.
Right.
It's
and
quite
Stephen,
shocking.
you mentioned just in the first few weeks, you guys were looking into things and finding things that didn't really add up. One of the things you said was with sales around the lakefront property there. As many of my viewers will know, Chestermere has a beautiful freshwater lake, one of the nicest in Alberta that I've experienced. I often talk to people about how I miss the freshwater from Ontario. So I do really love Chestermere. Can you explain a little bit, Stephen, about what went on with those sales there that seems so irregular?
I believe residents initially contacted the mayor because the mayor actually lives on the lake as well. And in, I guess around 2009, 2010, the city forced the sale of land. They acquired it from the Western Irrigation District, and the section of the land just that borders on the water where their docks are, they acquired it. It was illegally subdivided because in order to subdivide property, you need road access, which there was none. They forced the sale to all of the homeowners around the lake. And in some instances, they gave mortgages to some of the residents, where other residents, they didn't give them any mortgages. The one that had contacted us, I believe her husband had a heart attack or had some health difficulties at the time and couldn't pay for it at that point in time. The city came in with equipment, destroyed her dock, destroyed her shed, destroyed her electrical, and erected a 6-foot fence between her and the lake. And this went on for numerous years. A year later, she went back and she said, now we're in a position to buy it. And they increased the price 300%.
And when you say that they were giving mortgages, the city was giving mortgages?
The city was giving mortgages. We had asked the questions initially, and then we got a response from the CFO at the time. And it was like pulling teeth for information. That would be illegal, or we've corrected it now. We're no longer in an illegal position. It was very, very odd. The more questions we asked, the more evasive they got.
I've never heard of a city giving mortgages before. Is that a regular practice?
Under the MGA, you're not allowed. The city is not allowed to lend to a private individual or give a mortgage to a private individual. They can do it to a nonprofit, in which they did. I believe they did it with the Yacht Club, where it's got a 35-year mortgage from the city with very good terms. But you cannot do it to individual residents. You can't loan them money.
Right. Okay, gentlemen, I just want to dive into what the province is arguing here. So Municipal Affairs Minister Rick McIver, he said the city was being governed in an improper, irregular, and improvident manner. He has also ordered a financial inspection of the city's booked, as you know, and Deloitte is expected to finish that report by mid-April. And you guys were elected in October 2020, as you mentioned, and dismissed in December 2023. So one of the matters of contention is Documents filed by yourself, Jeff Colvin, in court show that you ranked up around $8,500 on charges in a city-issued credit card while dining out 84 times between March and June 2023. I'll let you address that in a second. As well, the city filed its past 2 years of audited financial statements late. Now, that was partly due to a falling out in late 2022 with the city's former auditor. So those are the two issues of contention I could find. Obviously, we have the statement from McIver there, but there seems to be lacking some specifics. But Jeff, let's get started. Can you address the charges on the city issued credit card with dining out? Because it does seem a very high cost to taxpayers.
Yeah. So what we were doing is that in order to keep things organized, we basically, when we came into office, we found out that they had over 60 credit cards, and we asked them if they had been reconciled, and they indicated yes. And we said, great, show us the last 6 months. And they couldn't, because they didn't reconcile the visa statements. So we said, listen, we're going to cut these down to 6. So we cut down to 6 Visa cards so that they could be reconciled. One of those Visa cards was the mayor's. And so what we did is we wanted to keep everything so that it was tracked on, easy to track and easy to follow. So any of the times that we'd had dinners, any of the times we were working, any of the times we were working over lunch or dinner with council, all of that would go on the mayor's credit card. Anytime that we had meetings that were with city business people, et cetera, which would include CAOs, which would include councillors. Again, we were told that when we were in our orientation that we cannot let people buy us lunch or dinner, because that could be perceived as some kind of a bias. And so we made sure that we didn't do that then. So we followed exactly what we were told. So anytime that we were working over lunch and over dinner, part of the process is the city covers the cost of that lunch or dinner. And that's really it. So when we were working, along with fighting Minister McIver over this silly inspection that he had started 2 months into our term, we were working 12-hour days. And so because we had a very tight agenda of trying to save money in the city and trying to restructure the staffing and the attitude around our taxpayers with our staff. And so we didn't want to let up on anything we were trying to accomplish just because Minister McIver was trying to frustrate us with tons and tons of work, which he did, which I do feel bad for some of our staff as well, because they had to put in extra time to try and make these things that Minister McIver had requested be done. But we did accomplish that. So all of the things in relation to our visa charges and whatnot, those are only for situations where we're working or we're at a business meeting, for example. And so we're not going to dinner at any fancy restaurants or anything like that. We're not going to, I don't know, High's Steakhouse or something like that. Like a lot of these times you're ordering in Subway. You're ordering in, we have Harvey's. We're going to lunch at wherever in Chestermere. So, as much as it seems like, if as you suggested, that it's often, that is because of the schedule we were working. And so part of the city's policy is that for example, as our council is working over lunches or dinners, then food is brought in during our period that we're working. So it's nothing fantastic, but they definitely are trying to blow that up into more. And quite frankly, $8,500, I would suggest that we were probably spending closer to, because that includes like hospitality. So when we would go on conferences, that would be our hotel rooms. When we were in Edmonton or Regina, we would be eating at a restaurant in Edmonton or Regina while we were on city business. So that would include all of those kinds of things. And so likely it was closer to probably $2,000 a month or $1,500 a month, I would think. But again, that's covering off food for 3, 4, 5 people at a time. So depending on what's happening, so it's nothing dastardly behind it. There's no other. It's very simple what it was, and all it was us working over these time periods. And what ended up happening, as I'd mentioned earlier, is that our focus around our staff was focused around changing the concept of how we waste money. And really focusing on how we can accomplish serious performance goals and targets. And so what we felt is our public had to be dealt with and had to be thought of like investors or shareholders. And so one of the things, for example, my staff had come to me. I'd asked for a boardroom TV in our council boardroom, and so they were going to get me something like a 70 or 80-inch TV and whatnot. And I said, make sure you don't waste money, because there's lots of TVs out there. I just need it for presentations and whatnot. They came back with a quote for $100,000, and I said, I know we had the conversation. You were here and I was here about don't waste money. So with the CAO, we went to Best Buy and we bought a $1,300 80-inch TV, and that's what we used on our boardroom wall for presentations and whatnot that we have. And so, our philosophy was saving money, and that's how we were able to save so much money. Like we saved in our very first year, we saved over 10, $11 million in our very first year, which is when we got in. You got to understand. I mean, it might not sound like a lot of money, but in our city, our residential taxes were 20 million. Okay, our budget was 50, but our residential tax portion was $20 million. So for us to cut, we cut $4 million in our first year, which put us down to 16 million. So for us to find another $10 million, that's unheard of. And at the same time, we were able to then cut taxes the next year by 25%. So it can be done. And this is one of the things that, we're trying to show other municipalities and other people in their cities that government and staff have a typical apathy feeling towards residents. They see their money as they don't respect it. And they have no problem spending it significantly. And I just think that it's a commercial operation. So yes, there is money spent, and it has to be on quality product. And as long as you're, going about the job that you need to go about, yeah, there is a cost to doing work. There is. And it needs to be done at a high quality level and on purpose. But all companies want that. All companies in the private sector want quality product and quality return, but they don't want wasted money. And that's one of the things that we prided ourselves on was doing that. And I can speak to, things around that. But it was really important that, like when we, as I mentioned before, around, how to focus on staff on saving money for residents, we had a situation where our CAO, interim CAO, had paid out some hush money of $600,000. And that was paid out to two people, almost $400,000 to an ex-CFO and just over $200,000 to an ex-director of HR. And why that's so important is that anything over $75,000 has to come to council. A CAO is allowed to spend up to $75,000. That's an unbudgeted item, and without coming to council. And that's okay. That's allowed. So that's allowed. But if it's over that, they need to come to council because we are the stewards of those funds. And so our budget in council, for example, was, I'm trying to remember it exactly. I don't know if you know, Stephen, but it was over $100,000 in council. And so we got nowhere near to spending that kind of money. And I imagine that sounds like that's a lot of money, but a lot of other cities would spend, significantly more than that. But we prided ourselves on making sure we didn't.
Right.
And so it was good.
Right. So just to go back, the 85, I think, is a bit closer to $8,600 a month. You're saying that wasn't just me out wining and dining. That was meals for city council as a whole and the CAOs. When we were working late or when we were working over lunch, we would order in food, sometimes go out. So that was just, you were spending somewhere between probably just over $2,000 bucks a month and over 4 months to get to the just over 8,000 there. And then for the second claim that I mentioned, the city filed its past 2 years of audited financial statements late, and that was partly due to falling out with the former auditor. Was there anything there that was of concern, or why is that issue being brought up now?
I'll let Steve jump into that, but it was a huge concern for us because we were bringing irregularities to that auditor, and they would put their pens down when we brought concerns, and they would not do any more work, which is very, very odd.
And then that's what
Stephen
led
could
to at least one of the years the report actually being filed late. Stephen, would you care to
being
speak to
late.
this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one of the things to consider is the year that that the KPMG audit ended up being delayed, and then they resigned at the end. That was 2021. That was the year we were elected. We basically had nothing to do with that year. It was all of the prior council. But when we did come in, and my background was as a senior financial partner for the railway. So I know a thing or two about budgeting, capital planning, asset management, internal financial controls. In publicly traded companies, there's SOX controls, which allowed investors to have confidence in the information they're getting. What I saw in the city was a big lack of controls. A lot of the ability to move money in and out of restricted surplus accounts, to change the financial statements as they decide. And I think the common perception problem is financial statements are created by the city and are the city's documents, right? They're not created by the auditors. What the auditors do is the auditors get an understanding of your controls. They won't give you an opinion on your controls, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, but they verify that the statements you produce followed the controls that you said you had. And the disclosures is entirely up to you as the owner of the document. So an audit really doesn't tell you a lot of information. And during that same audit with KPMG, they, as Jeff said, they tried to put down their pens numerous times because we had concerns. We heard about people having bank time, and we wanted to ensure that on the liability side, that was recognized in the financial statements. So we had all of these questions, and it may also have been tied back to the fact of the prior council's information was deleted. The emails, the files, all that information was not available to us, or at the same time, it could not have been available to the auditors, or it may have been provided to the auditors, but then there was a problem. How do you explain to council that you told them that it didn't exist?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for explaining that. Just before we get into sort of the last issue I want to cover before I'm going to let you guys go today, we've covered some of the issues that have been arisen, some of the allegations. For my audience, I have not independently verified any of these allegations. I did send a request to Minister McIver's office to let them know we were going to be doing the show today. I have not received a response to include as of this time. If I get one before we post this, I'll be sure to include it. But we're just kind of doing a snapshot of this issue right now because there are so many allegations and there's so many things that we're wading through. I'm sure that we'll get back to this story. And that kind of leads me into the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is this is now hopefully before the courts. I know that you guys have filed an injunction. You're hoping to get this resolved in the courts. Jeff, can you give us an update? What does that look like right now?
So what we're in the process of doing is we have a judicial review, which is like a lawsuit, and we're just in the process with the Chief Justice having deciding a date that can be heard before a by-election. And so that was recommended by the judge to indicate that this should be heard before the by-election. And in the municipal world, in order to get a judicial review approved, the judge that you have to approach has to determine if you have a likelihood of success. And so the judge, if it's frivolous, for example, the judge won't waste the court's time. And so the judge felt that we did have a high degree of success and would allow us to proceed with that judicial review. So you have to pass that first test, which is important, and we did pass. So we're now just waiting for a date from the Chief Justice to allow us to come to court before the by-election, which we believe would be somewhere possibly in June of this year.
Right. And you and I chatted about this on the phone earlier. And for a minute, I thought that the lawsuit had been canceled because there's some headlines in the news that says the city of Chestermere has abandoned the lawsuit. And you explained to me, no, the lawsuit is still ongoing. It's our lawsuit, but the city has had its name taken off of the lawsuit. So I'm wondering, in terms of, who's covering the cost of this? Are you guys paying for this out of pocket? Is this something the city will be required to cover?
Yeah, so the city, unfortunately, every time the government comes out with something, it's never truthful. So what they did when they said that statement that we've canceled the lawsuit, that's not true. They can't do that because on the lawsuit, the city is named as and the 4 of us councillors are named, the mayor and 3 councillors. So if the city wants to withdraw its name, it can. It has that choice, just as we would have that choice individually as well. And so the city did withdraw their name, but they cannot cancel the lawsuit. So unfortunately, they released a statement to the public that said, yeah, we canceled the lawsuit, it's all over. And that's just flagrantly not true. In regards to costs and whatnot, no, yes, that is something that the four of us are funding. And so the city does not fund the cost of it going forward.
Well, I'm sure that we'll be following this case with interest. As I mentioned, my viewers have asked me to cover this. There's a lot of interest in it right now. Thank you so much for joining my show today, and we'll definitely have an update, I'm sure, in a couple weeks or a couple months.
Thank you very much. It's really crucial that people understand the conflicts that are part of this. One of the things that really why we're so critical of Minister McIver is that he should have recused himself, because it's unethical that he's involved, because he's the brother-in-law to the previous mayor that was under investigation by us for some alleged contraventions, I guess. And Minister McIver, in a letter that I wrote to him about his conflict and in breach of the Alberta Conflict Act, indicated that he did not feel that he was in breach, and he was not going to recuse himself. And so the test of that is not for the person who's in conflict to recuse themselves and make that decision. It's for the person who's making the allegation of it. And so Minister McIver doesn't understand that. And just as a one final point, Municipal Affairs remains in breach of a court order to provide us with the evidence against us. And we've been claiming that for the last 2 years when they did this inspection. What is the evidence that you have against us? You are supposed to give it to us in a proceeding in court as part of judicial fairness. They're supposed to tell you, what are you being accused of? And here's the evidence. So you have an opportunity to say, that wasn't me, I wasn't there. Here's the evidence that supports my statement. We've never been given anything like that. And that's very, very, very unfair. But
Right.
thank you very much for your time, Rachel. If you have more questions, we'd love to, answer more, of course. That's what we're here for.
Absolutely. We'll be keeping a close look at the story and to see if we can get some of that evidence put forward to really weigh what's going on here and see both sides of things. Jeff, Stephen, thanks so much for joining my show today. As for the rest of you, I'll be back on Saturday with my regular programming. Please let me know in the comments below if you guys are interested in following this Chestermere case and what do you think is going on, and I'll be sure to read some of your comments on Saturday's episode. Hey everyone, and just a quick update for you guys. I had mentioned during the show that the minister's office had not responded in time for us to include that in the show and get a response from the former mayor and former councillor. However, he did respond before the show went live, so I'm just going to include that response now so that you all have it and are able to hear his side of things. A spokesperson for Minister McIver said that concerns about the Chestermere government were brought to the province's attention beginning in January 2022, and an independent inspector appointed by Minister McIver conducted a municipal inspection of the city of Chestermere that resulted in 12 binding directives from the previous minister. The response says, quote, "These directives represent the bare minimum that any citizen of Alberta should expect from their municipal government. The city's failure to comply with some of the directives, and with the supervision of the official administrator appointed to supervise the municipality and its council, resulted in the dismissal of 4 elected officials and 3 chief administrative officers. The minister's decisions in this matter are supported by the independent inspector's report, the minister's directives, and the reasons for dismissal, all of which have been released publicly and remain available online."